I'm Jack, and I have a father. His name is Michael. He's not just any father, he's a man who has a knack for turning even the most ordinary days into adventures that linger in your heart forever. My father is the kind of person who never lets life become dull. He's full of stories, strange ideas, and a little bit of chaos that seems to follow him everywhere. Growing up, I always thought of him as larger than life. He wasn't a superhero in the traditional sense, but he had a way of making things feel magical. He would point to a patch of weeds in the backyard and convince me they were some rare plant with mystical powers. He'd cook a simple dinner, but serve it like a royal feast, complete with exaggerated bows and a made-up accent. For most of my childhood, I believed he was some kind of secret adventurer. But the thing about my dad is that he's also incredibly flawed. He's stubborn, impulsive, and sometimes too proud to admit when he's wrong. And yet, those flaws never made him feel less like a hero to me. They just made him real, and in some ways, they made our story even better. One day, when I was about 12, my dad decided we were going on an impromptu road trip. It was the middle of a sticky July, and the air conditioning in our beat-up station wagon had long since stopped working. I remember watching him pack the car with the oddest assortment of things: a fishing rod, a deflated basketball, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle, and 2 cans of beans. I asked him where we were going, and he just grinned and said, "To find treasure." Now, to most people, that might sound like the ramblings of a man who had no plan, but I knew better. My dad's idea of treasure wasn't gold or jewels, it was something unexpected, something that would make a story worth telling. The first few hours of the trip were uneventful. We drove through endless stretches of farmland, stopping only for gas and to let our dog, Max, stretch his legs. But then, as the sun began to set, my dad turned down a narrow, dirt road that seemed to lead to nowhere. The trees on either side of us grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading light. "Dad, are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked, clutching Max's leash a little tighter. "Good ideas are boring, Jack," he replied with a wink. "Besides, we're looking for treasure, remember?" Eventually, the road opened up into a clearing, and there, in the middle of the woods, was an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like something out of a ghost story: weathered wood, a sagging roof, and a porch that creaked ominously in the breeze. My dad parked the car and jumped out, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This," he declared, "is where the treasure is." I wasn't so sure. The place gave me the creeps, and even Max seemed hesitant to leave the car. But my dad was already halfway to the cabin, so I had no choice but to follow. Inside, the air was musty, and the floorboards groaned under our weight. My dad wandered from room to room, inspecting every corner, like he was an archaeologist on the brink of a great discovery. Meanwhile, I stuck close to Max, who kept growling at shadows. After about an hour of searching, my dad found something in the attic, a dusty old trunk with a rusty padlock. He called me over, his voice filled with the kind of excitement that made it impossible to say no. Together, we pried the lock open with a crowbar we'd found in the corner. Inside the trunk were stacks of yellowed letters, a few faded photographs, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. My dad picked up the box and opened it carefully. Inside was a pocket watch, its face cracked but still beautiful. "This," my dad said, holding up the watch, "is the treasure." I didn't understand. It wasn't gold or jewels, it was just an old, broken watch. But then my dad began to read the letters aloud. They were love letters, written by a man who had lived in the cabin decades ago. He had written them to his wife while he was away at war, promising to come back and build a life for her in the woods. As my dad read, I realized the treasure wasn't the watch or the letters, it was the story, it was the life these two people had shared, the love they had poured into each word. We spent the rest of the night in that cabin, sitting by the fireplace and reading every single letter. My dad even managed to fix the pocket watch, winding it until it ticked faintly in the quiet room. The next morning, as we packed up to leave, my dad placed the pocket watch back in the trunk. I looked at him, confused. "Aren't we taking it with us?" I asked. He shook his head. "The treasure belongs here, Jack. We were just lucky enough to find it." That road trip became one of my favorite memories, a story I've told countless times. It wasn't just about the cabin or the letters, it was about my dad and the way he saw the world. To him, life was full of treasure if you were willing to look for it. As I grew older, I started to see my dad in a more complicated light. He wasn't perfect, and there were times when his impulsiveness caused more harm than good. But even in those moments, he taught me something valuable. He showed me that life isn't about being perfect, it's about finding joy in the imperfections, about chasing stories that make your heart race. Now that I'm an adult, I try to carry that spirit with me. I still go on road trips, still look for treasure in unexpected places. And every time I find something, a strange rock on the beach, a forgotten book in a thrift store, I think of my dad. He's older now, his hair grayer, and his steps slower, but his eyes still have that spark of adventure. Sometimes, I take him on road trips, and we look for treasure together, just like we did when I was a kid. And every time we do, I'm reminded of one simple truth: my dad may not be perfect, but he's the best kind of hero the kind who turns life into an adventure,